सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
As you've probably noticed, the BJP and the larger Sangh Parivar have a way of making sure that Hindu-Muslim issues dominate discourse. It could be anything. It could be the demand to open up alleged secret rooms in the basement of the Taj which contain apparently Hindu idols. It could be the controversy over schoolgirls wearing hijab. It could be the demand to change the name of Akbar Road in Delhi. But there's always one issue after another. No sooner does one issue die down than another controversy starts. Now it's easy to see why they do this. The BJP likes the idea of a communally charged atmosphere, and apart from anything else, it's also a distraction from the real problems that this country faces. So when the whole dispute about the masjid-mandir in Kashi started, when they claimed that they'd found a shivling over there, I assumed that it was just another of those issues. But it's the vehemence of the BJP's response that has convinced me it's more than one of those keep 'em simmering issues. First of all, anybody who joked about the controversy, anybody who said, it's a fountain, are you going to call every fountain a shivling, was mercilessly attacked on social media. The vehemence of the response, not just from the IT cell, but also from the BJP's surrogates, convinced me that something was happening. And then the Delhi police, always the best weather vane when you want to find out what the government is thinking, got in on the act. A professor was arrested for a tweet about the fountain stroke shivling, and the Delhi police put him in jail for 14 days. Fortunately for him, a fair-minded judge gave him bail and said there was nothing he'd done to promote anti-communal feelings or to pose a threat to communal harmony. But it was a close-run thing. So I began to think about it. Why is the BJP so invested in this? Why has this become such a big issue, whereas all the others have been issues you raise every week and then move on to the next one? And then I thought about it. And if you think about it, you'll come to the same conclusion. 2 words: Babri Masjid. I don't know how good your memory is, or even if you're young enough to remember, but on the assumption that you may not remember everything, let me give you a brief historical recap of what happened in the 1980s. There was a dispute over a mosque/temple in Ayodhya. It was called the Babri Masjid. The Hindu side to the dispute claimed that this mosque had been built on a temple, and that the temple was originally one that had been built to mark the spot where Lord Ram had been born. Now, this dispute had simmered on for years and years. It had got to the situation where no namaz was allowed in the mosque, which had become a disused, dilapidated structure. That should have been that. But then the VHP started an agitation in the 1980s, which LK Advani took over. And LK Advani's appeal was very simple. He said this is one of the most sacred spots in Hinduism. This is a disused mosque. Nobody even says namaz. Why can't we move the mosque a little bit so that we can build a temple to honor Lord Ram? Move the mosque? Yes, said Advani. It's not difficult to do. Mosques are moved all the time in Pakistan. Often they're moved brick by brick. Even if there's a highway that's going through, they move the mosque. So I personally will help the Muslim side, and we will move the mosque and we will build a temple. Now, this isn't quite as reasonable as it sounds, because first of all, there's no doubt that the whole claim about this being Ram Janmabhoomi is dubious. Other spots have claimed to be Ram Janmabhoomi. The average Hindu does not think of Ram as a living historical person who lived in Ayodhya or in UP. We think of him as God. And there is certainly no proof that the historical Ram actually lived in this version of Ayodhya or that he was born there. So the claim that this is one of the most sacred spots in Hinduism was suspect. People had heard of this controversy because Advani had told them that. But no matter, Advani still managed to make it such a big issue that the Muslim side was portrayed as being intransigent. He knew that once he made this demand, several things would happen. Number one, the Muslim side would say, absolutely not, we will shift nothing. And certainly there was a very aggressive Babri Masjid Action Committee with people like Sayyid Shahabuddin who said no compromise is possible. There was also the claim made by secularists of all hues saying that there had never been a Hindu temple there. This is a lie. Well, how do you know? Unless they'd done an archaeological survey, it was not possible to be sure. But they insisted they'd never been there. And three, which Advani expected, the Congress government at the time actively backed the Muslim side. So this is exactly what Advani wanted. He then went to India's Hindus and he said, can you imagine the most sacred spot in Hinduism? A mosque has been built there. All I'm saying is this mosque has no significance for Muslims. Why not move it a little bit? And guess what? They're saying, no, we won't move it. So is this secularism? It's pseudo-secularism. And that was the start of this narrative of Hindu victimhood, which I think we still hear today. Now, at the time, I was in a minority. I believed that this narrative of Hindu victimhood was very powerful. I believed that people all around me were believing it. No, I didn't believe that Hindus were necessarily victims, but I knew that there was a sense in which Advani was convincing. People believed that. I knew that the more the government seemed to be backing the Muslim side, the more Advani would be able to create this atmosphere in which Muslims were appeased and Hindus were discriminated against. So I suggested that perhaps the Muslim side should agree to some kind of compromise. It's not a particularly important mosque for Muslims. Make a magnanimous gesture, say we will move it ourselves, even though we don't accept your claim, because we believe in communal harmony. That would have taken the wind out of Advani's sails. That would have ended all this stuff about Muslim appeasement. But of course, the Muslim side didn't do it. And we know what happened next, right? The Babri Masjid was demolished eventually. It was demolished when a Congress government was in power. And more recently, the Supreme Court gave that land to the Hindu side anyhow. So it's hard not to believe if there'd been a compromise in the 1980s, the results wouldn't have been very different. The mosque could have been moved, not destroyed perhaps, but it certainly would have been moved. But the communal enmity, the dangers to harmony, the riots, the bloodshed, all of which followed, the fact that this narrative of Hindu victimhood got established, all of that could have been avoided if we'd done a compromise. But of course, India was so badly divided that no compromise was possible. Now, the BJP has learned that lesson. The BJP knows now that if it raises issues that have to do with mosques and mandirs, it's on a strong wicket. It knows immediately that so-called secularists will say there was never a mandir here. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. We don't know that. Yeah? There's no archaeological proof either way till you excavate, and maybe it's not such a good idea to excavate. They also knew that secularists would say Muslims never destroyed a single mandir. Muslims never built a mosque on the site of a mandir. These are lies. How can you even say that? Now, intuitively, you and I both know that this is not true. There were Muslim invaders who came in, who plundered temples, who broke idols. We know that mandirs were destroyed. We know that mosques were built over there. But the attitude we should take, and the attitude I think which is the only possible way of looking at it, is to say that things that happened several hundred years ago are terrible. But you can't right the wrongs of several hundred years ago overnight today. And certainly you can't hold today's Muslims responsible for what happened then. The fact that you're digging up these disputes is just your way of winning votes, of getting to today's Muslims. But of course, we won't say that. And so the BJP knows it's on a strong wicket. Perhaps the shivling does exist. Perhaps there were some Hindu symbols found in Kashi. We don't know. A report is awaited. But what we do know is that the BJP has found that this campaign has resonance. So there will be similar campaigns about other mandirs. There will be similar claims about Hindu mandirs being destroyed, taken over by Muslims, about a need to redress the wrongs of history, about the need to re-establish these mandirs. What can we do? Well, the secular lobby counts on the Supreme Court. In 1991, something called the Places of Worship Act was passed. According to that act, the character of a religious place, of a place of worship, must remain as it was at the time of India's independence, which means that assume it was a mosque in 1947. Even if you can later prove that it was a masjid, it was not a masjid, it was actually a temple, it doesn't make a difference. It will remain that way. Okay, it sounds good in theory. But it's not something the Supreme Court appears to really believe in. When it did the Ayodhya judgment, it gave the land to the Hindu side, but said this was a property dispute. It then said that the Places of Worship Act was wonderful and we should all treat it as a basic feature of our constitution. Except that in the case of the Kashi stroke, Banaras temple, that's not what's happened. What's happened is this. Various lower courts have happily entertained the case. They have commissioned surveys to find out if there was actually a temple at the spot. And when it went to the Supreme Court said, doing some research just to find out whether it was originally a temple is fine. There's no problem with the Places of Worship Act. It doesn't infringe on that. Which leaves you with the obvious question, assuming a survey is conducted, assuming the survey finds that there was actually a mandir at that side, then what happens? You go to the Supreme Court says, yes, Hindus, there was a mandir there, but because the Place of Worship Act, there's nothing we can do. Assuming that happens, it has the effect, surely, of inflaming communal tensions even more. So therefore, this assumption that we're all safe because there's a Place of Worship Act, because we can count on the Supreme Court, because we can count on the lower courts, is an assumption that's being proven wrong day after day, and yet we cling to it. So what are we going to have? My worry and my fear is that this kind of campaign will continue, that all kinds of masjids will be called into question. There will be demands to right wrongs of several centuries ago. There will be claims for historical checking. There's already demands that you dig up the area around the Qutub Minar. I referred to the idiotic controversy about the Taj Mahal. That will become the currency of our political discourse. And we will lose ourselves in these fights over things that happened 500 years ago. We should just accept that, yes, it did happen. But there are lots of historical wrongs in India. The way we've treated Dalits is a terrible historical wrong. But we don't spend our time looking for reparations or giving Dalits some other way of making up. We move on. We try and take everyone with us. That is the Indian way, or that used to be the Indian way. Alas, it doesn't seem to be the Indian way any longer. The Indian way now is to scratch at the scabs of the past, scratch so much that they bleed, and then in the middle of the bloodshed, fight for votes, win elections. It's not a very cheerful thing to say, but I am gloomy. The more these kind of issues come up, the more we're pitting Hindus against Muslims, we're going to have a breakdown of communal harmony in this country. And when India should be going ahead, we will go backwards.